I'll tell you why I think Press Taylor needs to be the full-time play caller, and it ain't rocket science. I'll do it here today on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Your team every day here on Locked On Jaguars. We thank you for making us your first listen. I'm Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast that you can find on video and audio wherever you get your podcast, whether that be YouTube or in the audio world. Make sure you tap into that location each and every day to ensure that you do not miss an episode of Locked On Jaguars. That's right. Today's episode is brought to you and sponsored by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Shout out to the everydayers for listening to the show. We appreciate you very much. By the time we get to the back end of the show, I'm going to show you an example of love that happens as long as players play up to a certain level. That is the Brian Thomas Jr. love, and nobody, I would say that 20% of the people, only 20% of the people were happy with the pick. The rest of the people were like, we'll see. It's going on social media right now, so I thought I'd mention it a little bit. It's worth the segment, right? Jumping off the edge. How come a lot of those same people wanted edge rushers ever since the beginning of the 2022 season, and nobody's talking about that? We'll bring it up, and there's a reason. It's because the guys have played better, and this is exactly the theme that I'm talking about. Here's something else, and this is where we're going to start. Press Taylor has called plays all preseason, and Press Taylor has done a pretty good job. Press Taylor was the one thing outside of the center position. That's offensive coordinator Press Taylor. He's the one thing or the one person outside of the center position that folks really, really wanted to change. If I would have asked you back I could have asked you back last year, but if I'd have really asked you back in maybe March or April, what's the one thing you could change about this team? The first thing you'd have said is the center position. The second thing you would have said is Press Taylor being the offensive coordinator. Well, Doug Peterson said that Press Taylor was going to call the plays during the preseason. He made it clear that Shad Khan and other people have made it clear, people that cover team, that Shad Khan made it clear. He said he wanted Doug Peterson to call plays. But then you have to think, what else did he tell Doug? He kind of said, I want him to do it, but it's up to him to do what he thinks is in the best interest of the team. And when Doug Peterson was asked when training camp started, what's going to happen? He said, well, Press will call him Press will call plays in the preseason. And for the regular season, I'll let you know, basically. And someone asked him, what Shad Khan told him, owner Shad Khan, was that important? Paraphrasing the question, he said, yeah, it is. The way I took the answer from Doug is all of it's important. But he's also probably told me, and this is just me adding my 2 cents, and this is why I think it's important. He also told me to do what I think is in the best interest of the team. I think many times the narrative that was out was Press was trying to help his boy get a job. Then the narrative changed when the offense didn't appear to be doing as well as everyone thought to, well, he's trying to save face. He doesn't want to admit that he was wrong. What if I told you, and this is just my guesstimation, and it adds to my opinion of why I think Press Taylor should be the offensive coordinator. What if I told you it's because I think Doug Peterson thinks it's the best thing for the team? That doesn't necessarily mean that Doug Peterson thinks or believes that Press Taylor is absolutely better than him at calling plays. I can't tell you that I think that's what that means, but I do think it probably says something like this. I trust Press enough to know that he's going to be calling those plays because I need to keep my mind on the big picture and the entire ebb and flow of the game as the head coach. And I can't designate all of my time to just being the offensive coordinator. But I do have a guy who's my protege that can do exactly that. So while everyone else is handling their business on this team and doing the things that they're supposed to do as the leaders of their room, why would I, as the head coach, want to take over that part of it when I have a guy here to do that? I'm not going to. Doug Peterson isn't going to be in the ear of Ryan Nielsen. It's not his side of the ball anyway. He's not going to be bothering Chad Hall. He's not going to be messing with Coach Phil Rauscher, the offensive line coach. Chad Hall's the wide receivers coach. He's not going to tell Bernie Parmalee when to sub people in and sub people out. He's not going to do that. He's not going to be all up in Mike McCoy's ear telling him what to say to Trevor when he comes to the sideline. At some point, there's something called delegating authority. Doug Peterson at some point decided that it was best for him to delegate authority. Maybe it's in his pedigree. Maybe it's what he saw Andy Reid do to him all of these years. Maybe it's what he was actually doing in 2017 when they won a Super Bowl when he had Frank Reich. Maybe it's worked for him more than the wish of Shad Khan and a whole bunch of fans and media types. Maybe what has worked for him is exactly what he's doing. Even if that's not the case, that's what they have been doing in the preseason. You are what you practice and prepare to be and prepare to do. This is why I think he's the best one, Press Taylor, because it's actually what they've done the entire preseason. Even having Press come up out of the booth, even having Press on the sideline. I'm all for continuity. I am all for practicing exactly what you are going to do on game day. What have they been practicing? They have been practicing with Press Taylor calling the plays in the preseason. Why would you go into the regular season and do something that you haven't practiced in the preseason? You wouldn't ask a player to do it. You wouldn't. It'll remind me of when Patrick Ewing asked that kid at Georgetown, why did you take that shot? Have I ever seen you take that shot before? So why did you do it now? You don't ask someone to do something in a game that you haven't practiced. You also shouldn't expect any continuity or any flow to carry over from the preseason to the regular season if you do something different. I think he needs to go back and continue to wear the hat that he's wearing. I have said this before and I'll say it again. I believe what they're going to do is the same thing that they have always done. And that is they're going to work on a script. When they come out and start a game, those first, 15 plays or whatever, or 20 plays, however big that script is, those plays, Doug Peterson will probably call the game to get the game going. At that point, Press Taylor will take over. Because now the game isn't scripted anymore. Now, once we get into the game, things have to come quicker and faster, right? Even when your defense has the ball, the offensive coordinator is sitting there going through the play sheet and coordinating stuff. I want y'all to think about this from a functional standpoint. If he has been going through it while the defense has the ball, the offensive coordinator or whoever's responsible for building the play sheet for the next play or the next series, Doug Peterson doesn't have the luxury to sit there and be focused on that play sheet while the game is going on out there. What if something comes up and there needs to be a challenge? You got to go get him off the bench. He's sitting over there with his quarterback talking about what they're going to call. Oh, you want me to, hold on, wait a minute. You want me, I got to challenge something? What am I challenging? You see my point? My point is I don't know who's the better play caller. Neither do you. I've been saying it for 2 years. None of us know. But what I do know is the guy that's been doing it this whole preseason, and there haven't been any complaints, maybe, just maybe, he ought to keep doing it in the regular season because it's what they practiced in the offseason, and that's the message that he has been sending to his team the entire time. So why don't you just do exactly what you're telling your players to do instead of sending a mixed message? And that wouldn't be going against Shad Khan's wishes. That would actually be probably granting Shad Khan's wishes, because I guarantee you that Shad Khan probably told Doug Peterson at some point, do what you think is best. Doug Peterson better do what he thinks is best. Don't do what somebody else wants you to do and then you end up getting fired. Because now that's where regret kicks in. And that's where regret and you don't want regret. Nobody wants to say, man, if I'd have just done it my way. Do it your way. Apparently, the way you want to do it is to let Press Taylor call plays right now in the preseason, even in the last preseason game. He's going to call them in the regular season if it's my opinion that there's been nothing wrong with the flow of the game, the way the offense has been going. I still think that this goes away the second they start playing well. The key to them playing well is the offensive line. For some reason, the offensive line gets no blame for the way the play calling was last year, but everyone will say that it's the worst part of the team last year, and it's the biggest concern they have going into this season. I'm going to show you again in segment 2 when we're talking about the edge rushers, why it's important sometimes to not be 10 toes in on stuff, especially when you don't have the inside information. I'm going to do all of that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is brought to you and sponsored by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel here on Locked On Jaguars, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon game out of market. That's out of market. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. That's right. FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Segment number 2 here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. Before we get to segment 2, I'll give you a couple of quick cuts or a quick little bit of information. Brevin Easton, the rookie out of Albany, was cut, and the Jaguars, because of injury to C.J. Beathard, they don't want to go into the final preseason game with just 2 quarterbacks. They have re-signed E.J. Perry, who has been through here before, so E.J. Perry joins the Jacksonville Jaguars. All right, so we're speaking about things that where decisions were made that we kind of that kind of disagreed with the majority of the fan base. By the way, it was the last practice today, last media practice. Well, the media will get to see everything, and basically they were running around in shorts, so I didn't want to do a whole show about them running around in shorts. But some things that have not occurred that fans wanted to occur. Press Taylor calling plays first segment. This segment is the Jaguars going out and spending big money on an edge rusher. I can recall when people wanted to trade the first round pick from 2023, they wanted to trade it in 2022 for either Danielle Hunter or Brian Burns. Yeah, those were serious conversations that we had. And then people wanted the Jaguars to go out and they wanted him to sign Jadeveon Clowney. Yes, those also were serious conversations that were being had. And this is why I'm talking about it. I'm talking about it because nobody else is talking about it anymore, even though the team didn't do anything that they wanted them to do. And I know Ryan Nielsen, the defensive coordinator, has said you always want more pass rush. And he ain't the first person to say it. We've been hearing people say that for 30 years. And I understand and I get it. But it doesn't mean you have to sell your soul and sell yourself out in trying to get it, especially when you need everything else and a whole bunch of other stuff. Picture this. When we talk about Brian Thomas Jr. in segment 3, there were people that didn't even want that. They wanted a corner. Or they wanted another receiver that's playing somewhere else that got picked in the second round. So I want you to think back, and I want you to focus on things that you wanted that the team didn't do, and now you're pretty happy that they didn't do it. Here's the thing about the edge rush. If they used the #1 pick on an edge rush, they wouldn't have Brian Thomas Jr. We know that. If they used the #1 pick on an edge rush with the 2 guys that I said that at the trade deadline that I just mentioned, somebody would have been getting $100 million along with Josh Allen getting his $100 million. And the Jaguars wouldn't have had a first-round pick. So there'd probably not be any Eric Armstead either. And then what do you do with Trayvon Walker? You ain't going to put him full-time at defensive tackle there and even determine whether or not they want to do that or not. I don't think they do because he's 272, 275 pounds. And even though he's big and strong, they like him exactly where he is now. And they want to move him around and create a mismatch. It's not a mismatch if he's always lining up at 3 technique, which is probably 15, 20 pounds too small to play on a regular down basis. Therefore, people have jumped off of this edge rush thing. And they've jumped off because I think they believe that the 2 that they have are very, very good. The fact that Eric Armstead can play the 4-eye position, which is the big end, the left end, usually lined up directly in front of or shading the shoulder of the right tackle, because Trevis Gibson has been a little bit better than folks thought. Some people think he didn't have a good preseason game the other night, but I don't agree. I think Miles Cole has shown something. And I also believe the presence of Mason Smith, who is a big presence in the interior. I think that means that they know that they can limit the snaps on the interior of Eric Armstead and move him around. And even if Trayvon or Josh Allen goes down for a small amount of time, that they have adequate people that they can play in those positions. I'm a firm believer in the Jaguars thinking that they're going to be able to improve their pass rush in more than one way. Last year, it was about sack totals for the defensive ends. If you recall, at the start of the 2023 offseason, Doug Peterson said the priority was the pass rush. And then they go out and had no pass rushers. They keep the same ones they got. But then the two they have as a duo led any duo in the National Football League in total combined sacks. So they improved it. How did they improve it? By developing their own guys, by keeping Josh healthy, by Trayvon Walker actually improving and getting better. That's how they did it. Still, their sack numbers as a whole, as a collective, are probably not where people want them to be. So what did they do this offseason? They added pass rush from the inside in Mason Smith and Eric Armstead and gave them the versatility, along with changing the defense that fits this more. I want to give a shout out to the pass defensive staff because I know some of those dudes, and they'll probably do a real good job running that Tampa defense that everybody keeps saying is so physical. They said it in Miami at joint practices, and Doug Peterson reiterated that last week. That's why he wanted that defense run here. I don't think it matched up with the type of people that they have on the roster, and I think Ryan Nielsen's defense absolutely matches up with the people on this roster. The lesson here so far is sometimes you can fix something without doing what everyone thinks you need to do, because you're plugged in and you have your finger on the pulse of the team, and you know the result that you want and the result that all those critics want is the same thing, but how to get there is completely different because you're in the building every day. And this is the benefit of the doubt that I constantly tell people that they need to give the organization. And I know if the organization hadn't won a whole bunch, you ain't going to give them benefit of the doubt. But get this. In 2 years, this particular team, they've gone 9-8 in 2 straight years. So they're 18-16. You can give them the benefit of the doubt. You probably ain't going to give the people that they succeeded the benefit of the doubt, because once those guys are gone, the benefit starts over. I know it doesn't seem like that, but that's just the way it has to be. It all has to start over. So far, with Press Taylor being offensive coordinator, still yet to be determined. But I notice I don't hear a whole bunch of people chirping about it. Nobody's talking about edge rusher. They did what they thought that they were supposed to do, as opposed to doing what we all thought they should have done. I wasn't one that wanted them to trade no first-round pick for neither one of those dudes, unless they weren't going to re-sign Josh Allen, and then they were going to franchise tag him and trade him. I just don't think you could have 2 $100 million pass rushers and then, oh, by the way, have another dude you drafted first overall who might be just as good as everybody else, and then figure out how you going to figure it out? You going to mess up Trayvon's career and then you're going to have people second guessing you about taking him again. None of that made sense. I'm going to tell you something else that is starting to look like it's going to work in the favor of the team, and this one is going to work in the favor of me too. Brian Thomas Jr. I argue with people that you see on this show about Brian Thomas Jr. and told them that whatever perception they had of him being raw didn't matter, because I got to say this carefully, because those coaches love raw talent way more than they want a polished. Being polished and being ready to play doesn't mean that 2 years from now you're going to be better. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about Brian Thomas Jr. and the love he's getting for the fans, or from the fans, in segment number 3. Right now, I want to thank you for making Locked On your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Speaking of fantasy, we're going to talk about Brian Thomas Jr. And Included in that, we're going to give you a little bit of a forecast on what we think he might do and who he might actually be in the National Football League this season. We'll talk about that in the third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is brought to you and sponsored by Gametime. That's right, Gametime. The app is for real, man. You got to download the app, I'm telling you, because when you want tickets to any event, Gametime has it, man. And they got a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. That's right. And what they'll never do is tell you that your procrastination is not their emergency. Your procrastination is absolutely their emergency, because they prioritize Gametime Picks as well as last minute tickets that you can get to any event, concerts, comedy, theater, all of that stuff. All right. So here's what you do. Download the Gametime app. By doing that, you're going to take the guesswork out of buying tickets. You create an account and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code. I'm going to spell it for you. LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars. We're at your team every day. We talked about why I believe Press Taylor should be the play caller this year. We talked about why teams all of a sudden jumping off the edge. That doesn't mean jumping off the edge of a cliff. That means jumping off the edge of an opinion that the Jaguars all of a sudden needed some high-flying, high-priced edge to come in here to help this team and fortify this team. It's just not true. I think Eric Armstead really helps give them balance in that, where they increase the interior of the pass rush, but then they're going to play him at end. And then by getting Mason Smith where they got him, I think it's a win-win situation. Is one of the things, if Trent Baalke did anything, he did right to me by going back to an even front in base defense and then adding guys that fortifies that even front to help your secondary and to get people off the field in time. So shout out to him for doing that. I think he's done a wonderful, wonderful job of being able to get that done. Now, BTJ, Brian Thomas Jr., ran into a situation earlier today where people that I like were talking about Brian Thomas Jr. and guys were copping pleas, man. They were like, yeah, man, I wanted a Donai Mitchell and I wanted this guy and I thought he was raw. All of that stuff. I was one of those truthers from the very beginning of Brian Thomas Jr. because I saw his upside. It does help, too, that I follow high school recruiting very closely. And both Mason Smith and Brian Thomas Jr. were 5-star recruits like 3 years ago. And I followed their careers. LSU actually played Florida State at the beginning of 2 consecutive seasons. I actually saw Mason Smith injure himself celebrating the first of those 2 games. And I saw Brian Thomas Jr. have big games against a lot of guys that's running around in the NFL right now, including Jareem Jones, who plays with the Jaguars. So my point about him is being a raw recruit or a raw prospect actually helped him, in my opinion. And let me explain why. I have talked to enough scouts over the years, and I've talked to enough coaches where they say, I like the talent. Just give me the talent. Now, it doesn't mean that someone that's polished, for instance, his teammate at LSU, Malik Neighbors, more polished, but also immensely talented. I'm not talking about from the perspective of just because somebody has a whole bunch of talent doesn't mean that I'm saying that they're not polished. Sometimes you can be polished and have a whole lot of talent, like Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, guys like that, where they're ready to play early and they have a very, very high ceiling. Press Taylor, the offensive coordinator, spoke to the media today and said, Brian Thomas Jr. isn't where he needs to be for game 1. And so I'm sitting there thinking like, huh? And then in the very next breath, he goes, we think by week 1, he'll be ready where he needs to be for game 1. So you're talking about a couple of weeks here where you're going to get this kid game ready, where you're not going to skip past his development. You're going to actually walk him through the way you always walk rookies through, and you're going to let him earn everything. You're going to teach him. The thing I've heard about Brian Thomas Jr. is once you tell him something, he absorbs it. You tell him something, And just like that, the very next play, he does it and he continues. He doesn't backtrack. So whatever you teach him, he's getting it, he's learning it, he's applying it, and he's moving forward. Almost wanting a guy to be a complete package is sort of like you don't know if all they told him to do was run those routes that he was running in college. You don't know what they asked him to do. You just don't know. Sometimes college coaches want to win so bad, they just take advantage of what a guy does well. The thing that these scouts love is just give us the talent. Just give us the talent and we'll figure it out and we'll make it what we need to make it. All of a sudden now, after some preseason games and after some practice footage and after all of the media folks like myself have reported all of these brilliant things that he's done in training camp, now there's been a lot of change from people that thought drafting him was a mistake. In fact, there were so many people that wanted a cornerback. They just wanted a corner so bad that it was like, man, we can pick up a receiver later. And then when they added a couple of receivers in free agency and Gabe Davis and Devin Duvernay, and they went out of their way to try to re-sign Calvin Ridley, then when they did all of that, people were like, they're going corner. And then folks were reporting it, and it was true that there's going to be one corner on the roster after the 2024 season that was guaranteed to be here, right? All of a sudden now, corner isn't really a priority because you have Tyson Campbell re-signed. Ronald Darby is healthy. He looks great. He's on a 2-year deal. They did draft Jarian Jones in the 3rd round, but they also, and this is very, very important, they developed Christian Bradwell to be their nickel. They also have Monteric Brown, who has had a really, really good camp. And then they went out and brought in some more free agent DBs just to create competition. So now there's no rush to have a corner. In fact, if you go over there and ask anybody who's seen them and anybody who's been at all of these practices to start naming the things that the Jaguars need, corner probably doesn't pop up in the first 3 things, right? So now if you ask them about wide receiver doesn't pop up in the first 3 items either. So they fulfilled all of those needs. But more importantly, they've given Trevor Lawrence something that fans around here have wanted forever. And that is a take the top off the defense type player at wideout who also has catch radius, who also has size, who also runs good routes. And they did it with the 20th overall pick after moving back 3 spots. And he was their guy. Once again, kudos to him for getting that. I'm going to leave you with this, though. They've been right about a lot of things that they've done. There's some other things that this team still needs to do, which shows you how much had to be done this year because of what wasn't done in the years before. So while it is an improvement, I'm going to tell you now, you got this way because you had to do it. And folks are still saying that they didn't add everything that they needed to add now. I think you're always going to be trying to get better if you're any NFL team, especially the Jaguars. But I'll remind people, they're just trying to get better from 2 consecutive 9-win seasons. I'll also remind folks of something else I said. They can actually improve, but the record won't necessarily show it. And this is very, very tricky here, the pacing that they're going to improve and get better, in my opinion, it won't be as reflective in the win-loss column because they could play a whole bunch better and only win 11 games. I say only, and y'all are saying, what do you mean only? We'll take that. Of course you will. But my point is they can actually make what looks like a 5-game improvement, but it only be a couple of games. And that is because these last steps, man, are hard. To go from where they are now to a team that is a title contender, those steps, while visibly they look small, they're very, very difficult. It gets more and more difficult to take those steps the closer you get to the prize. But I think they got off to a little bit of a good start. I think all of the things that Jaguar fans were concerned about, of all of them, I just listed 3 of them that the Jaguars handled it, and there shouldn't be any more cause for concern. not even with the play caller. And I explained why at the top. This is because that's not what they practice all preseason. And what they do in game 1, game 2, and game 3, and game 4, you know what that's going to represent? Okay, this is how I watch football. Okay, show me what y'all been working on all offseason. Because that's what you're going to see when they get out there. And how can they show you what they've been working on all offseason if they don't do what they did all offseason? That's all. That's all I got for you, man. I'm telling you, just dropping knowledge, trying to help y'all become better fans and not lose your mind before the season even starts. All right, here's what we're going to do, man. We're going to get closer and closer. There is no media availability other than seeing them stretch, but none this week as they prepare for the last preseason game against Atlanta, where you'll see the starters for 2 weeks, for 2 quarters, not for 2 weeks. And then they're going to start trying to shape this roster into the final 53. So we're going to be focused on roster stuff from here on out. Of course, obviously, other than the game this weekend, where we'll do a pregame showing what to watch out for in the Falcons game, and then, of course, a postcast as long as the game is. I think we'll do a postcast this week. Even the game 2 wasn't really exciting, but we're going to do a postcast this week. And it's a road game, so I don't have to worry about navigate my way and traveling home. So we'll get that done for you, and we'll make sure we have that for you. So a few more days before the game to talk about this roster, and then we get down to business of trying to shape it. All right, man, you guys take care of each other and make sure after making Locked On Jaguars your first listen, go to Locked On Fantasy Football's podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. You can find the link to Locked On Fantasy Football in the description so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Take care of each other, man. The weather's going to be a little bit ugly coming this week, so make sure you guys drive carefully, and we'll see you next time here on Locked On Jaguars.